Good morning, tēnā koutou, and welcome everyone to this briefing on the draft decisions we've just released on fibre regulation. I'm Tristan Gilbertson, Telecommunications Commissioner, and I'm joined this morning by Deputy Chair Sue Begg, Commissioners John Crawford and Elizabeth Welson online, as well as the senior team who have been working on this important project. I'm going to begin today's briefing with a reminder of the context for the draft decisions we've just released. I'll then run through these draft decisions at a high level, outlining our proposals on information disclosure for all fibre providers and price quality building blocks for Chorus. I'll indicate what all of this means in terms of estimated allowable revenues for Chorus. I'll cover off process and next steps, and we can then wrap up with some questions in the time we have left. Let's start with the context, which is all about implementing a new regulatory regime for fibre services. This reflects how essential fibre has become to every aspect of social and economic life in New Zealand. Our job is to implement a new regulatory regime that will promote continued investment in this essential infrastructure while delivering quality, value and choice for New Zealand consumers. We've approached our work in two stages. Last year, we issued our input methodologies framework, which gives stakeholders certainty about the fundamentals of the new regime. That was the design phase. This year, we're applying that framework to set a price quality pathway for Chorus and information disclosure requirements for all fibre providers. This is the implementation stage. The new regime comes into force on the 1st of January next year and will sit alongside anchor service regulations set by the Minister. These regulations contain important protections for consumers, and in practice the protections mostly apply to the Fibre 100 service, which is the service used by most fibre customers, and the key protections are a CPI price cap and specific service level requirements attaching to that service. Our overall aim is for the transition from the old to the new regime to be as smooth as possible. So we've sought to retain the key elements of the old arrangements that have made UFB such a success, while also putting in place key building blocks to promote competition and consumer interests. With our draft decisions today, we're laying the very first building blocks of the new regime. There's an extensive raft of material, a total of 12 Commission documents released for consultation. These divide broadly into 4 sets of proposals. First, ID requirements for all fibre providers. Second, Chorus's price quality path for the first regulatory period. Third, limited amendments to enable the effective implementation of the input methodologies. And fourth, guidelines on Chorus's geographically consistent pricing obligation. In this session, I'm going to focus on the core information disclosure and price quality decisions, since these are the areas of immediate interest for most stakeholders. Now, I'm conscious that there is a lot of material to process. So after the overview session today, we'll be holding a further briefing session on the price quality model on the 11th of June. And we'll invite you to join us to look into more of the underlying detail at that point. Any technical questions you may have are probably best dealt with in that follow-up session. Let's turn now to the draft decisions we've issued this morning, starting with information disclosure, which sets the essential baseline for the entire regime. These requirements apply to all fibre providers, Chorus and the other local fibre companies. They've proven to be powerful tools in other sectors such as electricity and gas, where similar requirements apply. Shining a light on performance encourages providers to innovate, invest, and improve efficiency so that consumers receive high quality and affordable services. For fibre providers, we've proposed a package of measures so that everyone can see and compare historic and forecast financial performance, including profitability and return on investment, historic and forecast OPEX and CAPEX, pricing and contract information, asset management information, and quality, including availability, performance, faults, provisioning, and customer service. We expect to refine these requirements over time as the performance of fibre providers becomes better understood and to reflect ongoing changes in the competitive landscape. So that's the set of information disclosure requirements. Turning next to price quality matters. Next slide. Oh no. It's useful to remember that we are progressing our work on price quality in two parallel streams. One is focused on the price quality building blocks, and the other is focused on Chorus's regulatory asset base. Our draft decisions today relate to the first work stream, price quality blocks, and will feed into our final price quality decisions in November. In parallel, we're currently consulting on Chorus's proposed price quality regulatory asset base, the PQRAB, with submissions on this due tomorrow. We're aiming to give our draft views on the PQRAB in August, with this feeding into the price quality path we'll set in November, when the two parallel work streams will come together. In the meanwhile, for the purpose of the draft decisions we've issued this morning, we've used Chorus's proposed PQRAB, including Chorus's proposed cost and asset allocation, as the inputs for calculating preliminary allowable revenue figures. Obviously, because the proposed PQRAB is subject to consultation and change, the figures we've provided should be regarded as preliminary only and subject to change as the process moves forward. With that context in mind, let's now turn to the draft price quality building block decisions we've released today, starting with quality. Here, our key objective is to lock in existing high levels of performance for consumers and prevent any backsliding by Chorus. At this stage, we haven't proposed standards for any of the optional dimensions specified in the input methodologies. As I've mentioned, consumers are protected by the raft of ID obligations applying in this area, as well as the requirements attaching to the anchor services, which cover 2/3 of all fibre customers. So instead, we focused on standards for the mandatory dimensions, availability and performance, leveraging experience under the UFB arrangements as far as possible. For the mandatory availability dimension, we've proposed an average downtime metric with different quality standards for layer 1 and layer 2 based on unplanned downtime. This applies on a POI area basis and means that Chorus must meet the standard in each area rather than on average nationally. For the mandatory performance dimension, we've proposed port utilisation at 90% with a 0.1% threshold, because end user experience will be impacted if ports reach 90% utilisation, and only a small number of ports, 0.1%, should ever be allowed to reach that level. Our view is that together, these mandatory standards, combined with the baseline information disclosure and anchor service requirements, will ensure ongoing high levels of performance for consumers. The next price quality building block released today is depreciation. And here we've proposed for Chorus's core fibre assets applying the default straight line depreciation method set out in the input methodologies. And for Chorus's financial loss asset, applying an alternative diminishing value method with a reduced asset life of 14 years as permitted in the input methodologies. This alternative approach to the financial loss asset means it can be recovered more quickly than under the default option. This brings forward revenue of around $205 million in a net present value neutral way. We consider this approach better promotes the purpose of the Act by incentivising Chorus to invest during the first regulatory period, where there will be a push to complete the UFB rollout and connect customers coming off copper. The final price quality building block released today is expenditure. Here, Chorus has forecast $642.1 million in base capex, $335.4 million in connection capex, and $487.8 million in OPEX. We need to apply the expenditure objective set out in the input methodologies to determine whether Chorus's proposal reflects the efficient costs that a prudent fibre network operator would incur to deliver fibre services of appropriate quality. We've decided to exclude some of the proposed expenditure because we're not satisfied at this point that it meets the expenditure objective. We've therefore reduced base capex by $106.9 million, or 16.6%. We've reduced connection capex by $51.4 million, or 15.3%, and we've reduced OPEX by $52.2 million, or 10.7%. Now, it's important to note that some of the excluded capex is, in our view, more appropriately treated as individual capex, and Chorus can resubmit for approval on that basis and subject to the relevant requirements in the input methodologies. If Chorus resubmits and we approve, the net reduction in capex would be significantly lower. So they are the key price quality building blocks covered in today's draft decisions. When we bring all of this together, we're able to reach a preliminary view on the allowable revenue for Chorus. Now, as you can see, this gives us preliminary allowable revenue of $2.061 billion in present value terms in the first regulatory period. Allowable revenues increase over the period in line with increasing fibre uptake, with smoothing applied. However, as I noted earlier, we've used Chorus's proposed PQ RAB and cost and asset allocators as an input into these calculations, and the PQ RAB is subject to consultation and change. So again, these figures should only be regarded as preliminary estimates at this stage, although they'll firm up as we move through the process to our draft PQ RAB decision in August and our final PQ decisions in November. In the meanwhile, they'll give you a good indication of the current direction of travel. Finally, for completeness, it's useful to give you a recap of the inputs falling out of the application of the input methodologies, which also impact the numbers we've just been talking about. The calculations apply a vanilla WACC of 4.66 to Chorus's proposed initial RAB of $5.5 billion. This WACC value is indicative as at the 1st of April this year and will be finalised by the end of July this year, as I mentioned. Our decisions also apply other key IM inputs such as revaluations, the asset stranding allowance and the tax allowance, which we've set out for convenience in the slide. So that brings me to the end of this overview, which I hope gives you a useful framework for understanding the detail of what we've released today, as well as the wider process as we move forward. In terms of what happens next, we'll be holding another briefing session on the fibre price quality model on the 11th of June, where we'll answer more detailed questions on the draft decisions after you've had the opportunity to read and consider them. Our team will follow up with you on the details for that session. We look forward to receiving your views on today's draft decisions. Submissions are due on the 8th of July and cross submissions on the 22nd of July. We'll be issuing our final WACC decision in July, And in August, we'll be releasing our draft decisions on the initial PQ RAB valuation and cost and asset allocation.